Good morning, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to coming to my talk this morning. I'm going to talk to you guys today and start a discussion about the Karaf container that OpenDaylight is very excitedly decided to base their application on top of. The question I'm going to be asking everyone today is, what do you need from the Apache Karaf container? I'm here to elicit responses from the community to let us know from the upstream point of view, what is it that we can do in Apache Karaf to help make things easier for your community to build applications, run your code, manage it, provision it, all of those different features of trying to run a large-scale application such as this. We'd like to know what we can do to make your experience better. But before I get to that part of the discussion, I'm going to walk through a little bit about what we've been doing at Apache Karaf recently to let you know what we're doing at Karaf version 3, what's happening in Karaf version 4, and some of our exciting sub-projects that are soon to be released. So before I start on that, I'm just going to introduce myself. You'll probably recognize me from the IRC channels as ICPTS, which is just a shorthand for my blog, I Code by the Sea. I'm an Apache Karaf committer. I'm a Felix committer and a service mix committer. I've been following the Karaf project from the very inception when it was called the kernel at the service mix project, and it graduated over to the Felix project and became Karaf until it eventually became a top-level project at Apache, meaning that we have a full community that support and use Karaf as its own separate entity. I'm a part of the project management committee for the Karaf project. I'm also a full ASF member, so I have very deep affinity to everything going on at Apache. So I really appreciate being able to talk to all of you at the Linux Foundation about what we're doing and how we can work together from one foundation to the next to make application development easier and better. I'm also an author of OSGI Starter, Learning Apache Karaf, and the Apache Path Cookbook. These are books that myself and other community members have come together to help collaborate and edit and amass information about how to use some of the base technologies such as the OSGI core, how to get into using Karaf as application service, and then how to do interesting projects through our cookbook, such as making routers or web services and connecting to various kind of backends. Just the common things we see coming from the community members. So currently today, we are up to version 3.04 of Apache Karaf. OpenDaylight is currently using version 3.03 and some of the libraries from 3.01. 3.04 is just a small service release that brings in a lot of our upstream projects, updates to multitude of the PAX libraries. We have additional commands around Jazz security for when you're connecting in and trying to set up your realms. We've been doing a lot of improvements and just bug fixes in general from this one. And we also started adding in some additional support to make it easier for people to migrate going forward to a Karaf 4, mostly in the area of features. My general recommendation is for people who are currently building things on version 3 of Karaf to continue picking up all of our service releases on the 3.0.x line. What I would put forward, though, is that at Apache Karaf, what we tend to do, if we need to have a long-term support of a particular release line, such as Karaf 3, what we tend to do is that we'll then do the next macro release. So we can possibly do a 3.1 and a 3.2 and continue on for a long period of time if it's required by our community users coming back and saying, we really need support for this particular version. If we look at Apache Karaf version 2, we've had the 2.1 branch, 2.2, 2.3, and 2.4 being supported for the last 4 or 5 years. So we really do have a long-term support when we do one of our releases, and we will keep it moving along as best we can, adding in support for newer versions of Java, OSGI cores, and so forth, just to make sure that our user base is, has that bit of security to know that if they build an application on top of Karaf, that it will work this year, and the next 2 years we'll still see some service releases coming out, or at least a reasonable migration path to stay close to what they're using and not have to be bumped up to a new major version every single time. That being said, we're very happy from the Apache Karaf community to say that we have the Karaf version 4 released. Version 4 has been a major refactoring of the internal core of the Karaf container. We've done substantial work in a multitude of areas, and what this is going to mean for users such as the OpenDaylight community is going to start a discussion to decide, if they want to migrate forward to version 4 to pick up some of the great new features we've included. There are going to be a couple of things, though, that we'll highlight in this talk that you're going to need to be aware of to make that migration as painless as possible or seamless as possible so that everyone will be able to use these new capabilities. So one of the first things people have been asking again and again is, what do you do when you want to have that feature uninstall capability? I've been told by so many OpenDaylight users that they try to uninstall a feature and it may stop, but you won't see all the dependencies and extras being removed. On version 4, we've substantially improved the resolver mechanism that allows us to go through, do an installation of a feature, be able to see that all the bundles are installed, go back and uninstall that feature and see that its bundles have been removed. That's a major improvement over version 3. We are still trying to get a lot of users to come back and start using it and see if we have to make any kind of adjustments. But so far from the use cases I've seen, it's doing a lot better job of being able to handle the complicated set of dependencies and then the tertiary dependencies being removed from the container at the uninstall time. That being said, we did have to do some major changes to resolver. So what we were trying to do here was that we wanted to be able to make feature installation and its life cycle so much easier for people to use. We are now going to be checking for requirements. So if you look in a brand new Karaf 4 feature definition file, you'll see that you can add in a requirements section where you can put in things like capabilities for J2E OSHI version, or if you had some additional, like a hardware property being set, if you want to see that your container has that available and that's a requirement, you'll be able to specify that into your feature. And this will then allow you to, as well, with the feature resolver, it allows it to go out and automatically start downloading the additional pieces that you need to execute. We also have included a capability to handle our older Karaf 2 and Karaf 3 style feature descriptors. What's going to end up happening, though, is that when Karaf sees an older style, which is going to be dictated by a namespace, it will attempt to use it as it was intended to be deployed. If you use a new style feature, though, which is going to be in the new schema space, we'll be able to enable these things such as the requirement, and it'll immediately be usable. Yes, sir?
So we will have to rewrite all the features XML files for the projects for this to take advantage of the new features?
Yeah, so just to repeat for the recording, the question from the audience was that for existing features, if we want to make use of the new requirement capability within features, you would have to update it to the new schema version, and then you can add into it so those capabilities be recognized by Karaf. So that's what I would tell the maintainers of OpenDaylight to do. If they need to make use of the requirements capability in the new feature resolver, you would want to update the namespace, and then you can add in the requirements to your feature. Now, if you don't do that, you're going to be using it more in a degraded mode, running as it would be in Karaf 3. So it'll still work. It's just if you want to take advantage of the new capability, you're going to have to update your feature to let the container know. Follow-up question?
If you have mix and match of features that have the new namespace and the old namespace, and then, for example, the feature that I'm actually interested in, and I do feature install new feature,
Yep.
and it pulls in one of those that are using still the old schema,
Mm-hmm.
is it going to be able to uninstall that one too when I uninstall it?
So the question from the audience was that if you have a new style feature that is depending upon a number of old style features or has features that are old style as subdependencies, what will happen if you're attempting to make them live well together? The general answer on that is that the new features will have the access to the new capabilities. Older features, where we can, it should be able to do new lifecycle type things, such as the start and stop of a feature. When you're trying to do, or you're trying to mix it in to do something from a requirement, though, you're going to have to look on basically a case-by-case basis. If that old dependency needs to rely on there being a requirement, you're going to want to update that if you have access to it, but it should be able to still install that feature target into the container and start it up as normal. So the resolver is still going to be using the same resolution mechanism to say, are all these bundles, properties, configs, are all these present? And it will be able to track those and add those in. It just won't have the extra syntactic sugar we have for doing requirements added in. So they should be compatible. I would want to verify, though. This is what I always tell people to do is we do integration testing with Karaf, and I always say as a best practice, if you're developing features, we want to do integration tests using PAX exam to take your distribution and install your set of features and make sure that they are coordinating and working well with the other features you're using. So what I would then do is that if you had that new feature talking to an old feature or requiring the old feature, I would set up my exam to install the new feature so it will get the old style feature dependencies and automate the test to say uninstall my new one or uninstall the old version one, just to verify that the behavior stays the way you want. And that way we're able to make sure, because as it is, when we start doing the development of these, we're testing it out, but when we get into very large sets of bundles that we get in OpenDaylight, where I've seen 1,500 bundles being deployed on some of these controllers, we want to make sure that there's nothing exotic going on within these. That being said, the feature repositories we use within Karaf 4 have had a small refactoring, where we have brand new namespaces for them. So originally was seen standard and enterprise. Now we'll see framework and spring, static features. The main point that we're putting across here, if you're building custom distributions or taking OpenDaylight as your base distribution and then rewrapping that as your own provider or vendor copy of the OpenDaylight distribution, you need to be aware that there's going to be brand new set of feature repositories that the basic Karaf will be using. So if you're looking for particular features that came from the container itself, you're going to need to include these within your custom distribution. Following on to that, our namespaces have been updated. So we have the new schema file for 1.3 for the brand new feature capabilities. We have updated shell namespace and updated Jazz namespace. The shell namespace, which I'm going to continue on the next slide here, what has happened in Karaf 4 is that we've gone deep down into the internals, and we've updated all of those command line commands to use declarative services model underneath the hood. The rationale behind this was that initially, with the first couple of releases of Karaf, we would use Blueprint to wire all of our commands. Now we've set up a new Karaf service plugin that enables us to have service completion, parsing, and reference annotations for our declarative services, so we can create our new commands and keep the wiring as tight and as small as possible for the instantiation purposes of the Karaf. So what this does is it actually reduces the size of the base Karaf distribution, the amount of memory it takes, the size of the actual amount of code that has to be booted up, and the number of Blueprint containers that have to be instantiated. So it reduces the boot time and makes things a little bit snappier and a little bit smaller when it's running on your machine. So this is a good enhancement to the Karaf 4 code, and it actually cleans things up quite a bit because your code's more concise because you have all your annotations where your command logic's to, and you're not going off to some Blueprint file to try and find out where it's being instantiated and wired into your completers and other services. Follow on to this is our Karaf Maven plugin has had a major overhaul and a lot of consistency added to it. The Karaf Maven plugin is what we would use to build up a custom assembly. So from our point of view, when OpenDaylight's being built, they would use the Karaf Maven plugin to be able to assemble all the parts and features for MD-Sal, for BGP link state, OpenFlow, all of those different projects will be brought in through this. Commands such as adding your features to repository have been added in and improved. We have a validator. So the validator can go through and take one of your features and just verify that the contents is available. It's just checking structure and making sure that things are written in a proper way. Just a little additional things like this is just making it a little easier for developers to work with our features and to make it more reliable. So one of the more interesting things, and yes, we have a lot of new features in Karaf 4, and we can talk about that in depth afterwards. But one of the really exciting things I wanted to talk about is a project we actually have in vote right at this moment, but is about to be released, which we call the Apache Karaf decanter. This is a monitoring and alerting solution for Apache Karaf. What we mean by this is that the decanter project is able to deploy against a Karaf installation and allow you to monitor its health. So we're not just talking about the simple things such as what's the JVM doing, garbage collection, disk usage, memory usage. We're talking about being able to monitor and look at logging, analyzing what's happening within the applications deployed in the container, being able to do SLA-style alerting. So the example case would be is you're looking at an application that's running and you're saying, is this a healthy application? Not just is the application pinging, responding that's running, if the service is responding in a timely manner. So as service level agreement mindset, you'd say, I'm running my current service on a particular port. It's running at this long of a response time. If it goes beyond that threshold, alert us to let us know that, yes, it's still alive, but it's going slow. So really cool development, and it's something I think that OpenDaylight will probably want to look at this project to be able to extend it, add in plugins, and just extend the use and reuse this to do monitoring of a controller type project. So moving forward, this is when I wanted to actually open it up to the room and talk to all of you guys. This is the road ahead for the OpenDaylight community. As Apache Karaf changes its underlying libraries, our support for various OSGI specifications, Blueprint, DS, and all the different wiring technologies we support, we are making a lot of decisions that will affect the future direction for what OpenDaylight developers will be able to do for their application development using our features, using our provisioning, our management, our security models. What we want to be able to do is start getting more information back from OpenDaylight and getting the developers and team leads and vendors to start talking to us at Apache Karaf, coming to our user email list, going on to our Jira, and going on to the Apache Karaf IRC room and talking to us and starting to tell us what they need from Apache Karaf, what do they like, what do they not like, are there additional tooling that we're having trouble trying to get to execute on the container. Our community are always really happy and very helpful when people come in and start interacting with us and asking us questions about our experiences and how we can make things work better for the Karaf user base. So at this point, I'd like to open up the floor. Does anyone have a question or a comment or something that they would like to know about how OpenDaylight and Karaf are able to exchange ideas and improve both of our projects?
So can you go ahead and explain how the Karaf 4.0 solved the feature tracking problem?
Oh boy. The best way I can go into that is I'm going to have to bring up the source code and actually walk down through it. Essentially, what happened was that several community members dived into the matter. They opened up the code for the under the service feature. They basically had to rewrite everything for how wiring is detected to what the wiring trees become and making sure that we're able to walk all of these trees and then essentially have to tick off which bundles, which properties, which ones are being assigned, so that way when we want to remove, we can come back and follow that breadcrumb to remove them. To actually show, what I'd have to do is bring up the editor and start walking the code for you.
So let's say you want to install a feature
Mm-hmm.
that has the problem that I described earlier to you. So is there going to be a warning message, or is that just not going to uninstall the feature? Or?
Okay, so it's a case of you have a features installed and you want to uninstall it, but if you uninstall that, you believe it will take out another one. Okay, so in the case of that, what we've tried to do is we're giving you the tools to be able to test around to see if that is a safe operation for you to do. To get to a state where you want to uninstall, where basically you have the capability to just remove it. To see if it's a safe install, I gotta go back and check if we have any flag on it to say, if I uninstall this, what's the chances of it uninstalling B, C, or D feature targets? That is something that I honestly always gotta check in to take a look and see if we are able to detect that portion. What we're able to do is actually just remove it. The general property of the OSGI system, though, is that if you remove a bundle that's being used by someone else, you're going to still have a proxy reference to that original item. So that way, when you reload your bundles, it will, at that point, if there will be that wiring problem will happen because it won't have a dependency available. If you're going to remove a feature, if you're treating it as being like an application, that is, again, where we start coming back to the operator needing to understand what they are doing and what they are removing and what they are adding. because there are quite a few things that are being removed, depending if you don't know what the full dependency tree of your application. It's one of those areas where we always tell people you build your integration tests around the idea of that here's your feature, you've deployed it in an expected environment. Testing around that is to uninstall your feature and make sure that if it's expected to work with targets A, B, and C as being its general use case, then make sure that you can install A, B, and C together. Make sure you can uninstall A and that B and C is fine if A goes away and comes back. Same for B, same for C. Now, if you want to go to the most extreme general case, I mean, that's where we have to get to the case of, well, we have to operate our containers with some care and some due diligence, knowing to what you're removing. Just because when you're on a command line, you have that full capability to do what you want to do. So if you want to force something to be removed, you can absolutely go ahead and do it.
So that you can check with the safe uninstall feature, or it's just a safe install feature that you can check with that?
So on the feature uninstall command, I would just run the flags to see if we have a test, like a soft. That would be what I would want to do. And if we don't have that, that would then be the improvement that we would want to do in the community. So the way I would put that is for any kind of a command where we have in the container right now, if it's running an operation and you would like to add in an option or a flag to say, test this out. Before I uninstall, what is this going to touch? And then just print to the screen. If that's an enhancement that's required, submit a JIRA, talk to the community, and make it aware to us upstream that that's something that this user base requires to have. If it's not a feature, let's just go into something else, say like your SSH commands, or if you're looking at cloning commands or other commands for just monitoring something like, say, mdcell status. We have the ability in Karaf to create a lot of custom commands. And generally what will happen is that we'll create a command to just do what the developer needs to do for their use case. It's always possible to go through and update the commands if we find that there's additional flags and additional use case switches that would make the command even more useful. So in the case of something like mdsal, the original command would come up and just show you what's going on at the queue level underneath the hood. That was just an initial implementation of that command. It's very easy for someone then to go back and say, okay, well, we need to have a couple of flags that are going to start changing up how it's updating or what information it's displaying. Anything along those lines. Now, that's ODL-specific command, but if there's something within the Karaf area, you're saying, we provide this command and we need to have additional flags added to make it more verbose, or to, even if it's a case of what would happen if I was to install. If there's a way for us to be able to add in some kind of like a soft, or just tell us what's going to happen with this particular feature, let us know. Generally, what I will tell someone to do is to do the tree show command on a particular set of bundles to see what they're actually wired to in a running container. So from my point of view, that's what you would want to do just to start seeing where things are coming from. Is there another question or a follow-up?
Yeah, so the decanter, is that a feature?
So the decanter project is a sub-project that's just being created now. It's currently in vote for the 1.0 release. So it has its own release cycle. The way that it is built, it is just a feature. So it has a repository and a feature, so it'll be installable into the Karaf. And once that's started up, it has a really amazing set of capabilities. I'm just going to bring back up the slide on that. There is a link at the bottom here to Jean-Baptiste's blog, which describes the initial concept and scope of the project. Once the project gets fully released, we'll have full documentation up on the Apache Karaf website. So if we had it released now, I would have had a link to the website where we will have the user manuals and the how to install, how to set up and do this. One of the really neat things that has is the ability to do log appenders, and you're able to start looking at historical logs going through and set up metrics and like histograms upon various entries within.
So the port, which you can change that config file, the port that you want to do on,
Yeah, configurable. Everything that we put into a Karaf generally is just an etc file away from being reconfigured, or on a command line go in and edit the property directly. Yeah. So that was just, yeah. Here you go.
How is it very difficult to develop a plugin for that sub-project?
So
It's a bundle that we just send out to the feature.
the way that these kind of projects are designed generally is that they're made for extensibility. So Karaf is generally have a long association with the SOA world, so stuff like CXF, ActiveMQ, and Camel. So one of the initial appenders and analyzers are being created with those in mind. So what I would tell an OpenDaylight developer to do is to take one of those sample projects, such as the Camel one, and see how that's been implemented and use that as your template to then make ones that would work against MDSAL or work against any of the other northbounds or southbounds to be able to see what the performance of that particular service running in the controller is doing. So there's a lot of possibility there, and I think that there'd be a lot of synergy between what goes on within the Deluxe web interface and then this kind of a project to be, if it was reskinned to make it look the same, to be able to do monitoring of what's going on inside of your controller and have a nice way of adding in additional metrics and monitoring.
Can you go over the technology behind just the broad picture of the technology used to create the UI and how it's working on the
Okay, the best thing I can do for you there is that after the talk, I can pull up the code and we can dive directly into how it's being built. I think it's Kibana is being used underneath the hood for putting together the web page of it, but I'd have to dive deeper to be able to show you everything that's going into run it. It should be like a PAX web deployment. So generally within the Apache Karaf ecosystem, we're reusing a lot of the same projects again and again. To be able to build any of these kind of applications. So this would just be another example of reusing what we already have in container and then just adding in a little bit of extra pieces to be able to assemble things into a working application like this one. But the source code is always my definitive place. I always go straight to there instead of trying to memorize it because there's just too many projects we have running here. But that's the nice thing, again, with Apache, same with Linux Foundation. All the source code is out there, so you can dive directly into it and start working and extending it and reusing it. Yes, sir.
Yeah, so there's a lot of work around clustering AJ here
Mm-hmm.
and discussions today. Could you just give an overview about the Karaf Seeder, how it's used? It's like an end user or just for maintaining itself?
Yep. So the Apache Karaf Seller project is our own clustering implementation. Basically, the use case for that is going to be that you would have your Karaf container and you want to be able to share out your configurations and applications across multiple nodes. And that's our general topology of how we're trying to use that. We haven't tried to make it into something that's going to be for a specific use case, like camel routing or for web serving, one of those. It's tried to be kept as generic as possible so that it can be reused by downstream developers to host their application across more nodes. The suitability for something like OpenDaylight against, or on top of, I should say, of Cellar, that is something I would think would be an extremely interesting project for an OpenDaylight developer group to undertake and take a look and see how we can cluster it. Unfortunately, from my point of view, I don't have the deep knowledge of how OpenDaylight's clustering for such as OpenFlow would work. To be able to say if its style of clustering is something to be analogous to what Cellar is attempting to do, or if it's something that would be complementary to what Cellar is performing. Because we're looking at more along the lines of supplying the application across nodes and OpenFlow, and please correct me if I'm wrong how that's working. That's more about having multiple machines being able to share or kind of confederate like a network of brokers or a network of controllers to be able to do the same service across multiple routers. Anyone who can tell me can please correct me if I'm misinterpreting it. So that's more like a set of application level components trying to act together to provide a service. We're looking more along the lines of just here's our container. We're trying to stretch it out across more boxes to make it more available and add in more resources and make it more available to people. So there is a little bit of a difference for how that works. That being said, there's probably a lot of opportunities for OpenDaylight to be able to reuse the Cellar architecture to help it deploy certain services and have higher availability because of it. But we'd have to really research and take a look, and that'd be a really great topic if you want to do one of the unconference rooms and sit down and set up a Cellar and then deploy some OpenDaylight features or bundles on top of it and just see what can be made to work or what happens. That's a really, one of the great reasons to this kind of a conference is to experiment like that.
So do you know if
Akka, and underneath the hood, the initial implementation, I think, was a Zookeeper implementation on the first one. Under current one, for how it's being split, I don't think it's an Akka worker model underneath for how we're spreading that out. I can go and verify, but I'm pretty sure it's not Akka under the hood for there. But again, I always go right back to the source code to take a look for how Stellar is doing. Any more questions or comments? Or oh, here we go.
Turn on the feature
Mm-hmm.
A
Mm-hmm.
and feature B, feature, and according to them is let's say the feature A, you don't install feature A,
Mm-hmm.
you install feature B,
Okay.
vice versa. So now let's say I'm a dump. I don't know, I install feature A and then
Okay.
I install feature B.
Yeah.
Both of them implemented.
Mm-hmm.
Is there any way that it can set a flag? It will be in the graph that says that, hey, you already installed the feature A, you cannot install the feature B.
Okay, so I'm just going to restate the question just so that way it can be picked up by the mic. So, and correct me if I'm wrong, from my understanding of this, it's that you have a feature A that you installed and a feature B that you installed, but they're supposed to be providing the same service. Is that how I should be understanding it?
Different, but you don't use that one, right? For the example, ADSL and MDSL.
Okay. So from a domain point of view, you have two features. Both are going to provide the same thing, but you cannot actually have the two features working side by side from a user point of view. So not the point of view, will these bundles be able to start from an OSGI point of view? This is more of the, if I have ADSL running, you don't have MDSL running, that kind of a question. So that is something that's actually in the domain level from my point of view, because if you're from Karaf, what we're just seeing is here's a list of bundles and properties that need to be installed. As long as we don't have ports getting bind exceptions and that there's nothing going to be blocking that they have a shared resource, nothing within Karaf will prevent that two different features from being installed side by side if they don't have a conflict for a resource or something that would be blocking. So from OpenDaylight's point of view, what they would need to have is something along the lines of a service registry that would be able to say feature A is started, and that would have to update a registry to say, I'm currently running as an ADSL controller. And then if the MDSL features were to be brought up, it would go to the same service registry and say, hey, I want to become the this side of the controller, and would say, no, you can't because we currently have a running instance of the ADSL, and then block upon that. That would be something that would have to be implemented at OpenDaylight's level because you guys would be aware of exactly which services can be or cannot be running at a particular point in time within the controller. We don't know that from Karaf. We have to do things as generically as possible. So we can only say, can this feature and that feature be instantiated and run simultaneously? And that's as far as we can go. We don't know if their purpose for an end user would be conflicting. So follow up? When you exit from Karaf? So the shutdown time. Okay, so shutdown time within a container is going to be contingent on a couple of factors. If you're heavily using technologies like Spring or Blueprint, you're going to have to wait for those containers to shut down and release the resources. So if you have long-running connections to databases, to data streams, to certain resources, for safety reasons, the developers on those particular applications are probably putting in things like timeouts and some very long-living code to safely disconnect from certain resources. So that's going to take a bit of time for those to shut down. For the overall shutdown of a Karaf container, a shutdown force, it's going to take as long as there's information in the system, and what's going on internally is that we're trying to call all of the stop and the shutdown methods within your bundles to say, shut down safely, release everything, clean up, go down. The bundles don't know that the overall container is going down. They just think that they're going down in their general life cycle case of, I'm a bundle, I'm running, now I'm stopping to be updated or whatever's going to happen. And it doesn't know that you're just trying to shut down everything going to zero. So it's doing that safe shutdown, releasing resources as best it can. So if it's taking a long time for your application to shut down in Karaf, generally what we end up having to do is go in and take a look at the particular set of features or bundles and see if you have any additional way for you to tweak the way that you're releasing your databases or releasing links to certain resources. That's the real thing that you have to be looking at. If I was looking at an example like a camel route, I would be going into its container and saying, setting a shutdown strategy and telling it that after 20 seconds, just shut down completely regardless of the state. In the case of OpenDaylight, what you would be doing is going into those particular features and seeing if there's any kind of a setting or if there's a way for you to add a property to say that if you're running a service on a particular port, to just end that, release the port, and drop it, so that way the bundle can shut down faster. Other than that, if you have thousands of bundles, which in the case of ODL, I've seen the 1,500 bundle deployments before, it is going to take the JVM a period of time anyway just to bring down that many running threads, that many running processes. So yeah, I know it's a bit of one of those, it depends, but it is a case of, it's not so much that the Karaf itself isn't able to shut down quickly, it's that the applications that are running on top of Karaf need to be able to shut down faster. Yes, sir. Oh, sorry.
I'm running the Karaf.
Yes.
And all of a sudden, let's say that my power supply.
Yes.
And it's not a graceful shutdown.
Okay.
So how do I clean up my container before I can start that?
Okay, so the question that was asked is, how do you handle the case where your Karaf container is running and you yank the power supply, so the server is running perfectly happy, and we pull out the power, so it's going to go down in an uncontrolled state? How do you restart the container in a safe manner such that you can resume where you're to? So this is one of those use cases that we always like to say to people about testing. Generally, in case for Karaf, what's going to happen is that as soon as you kill the container, the persistent states that were running within your applications are going to be where they were. Anything that was running, such as like a transaction, if you're using a transaction manager like JTA or one of those transaction managers should take over their normal functionality to roll back calls that were in play. But for other events, say if you're in the middle of installing a feature or in the middle of uninstalling a feature, that is going to be one of those real tricky cases. So say you're uninstalling MDSal from your controller and power gets cut right then and there somehow in the middle of that operation. That would normally take you, a few seconds for that to run. Things will then be into an unsteady state. So what will happen is that on the restart of Karaf, during that uninstall, if it had not completed, it should come back up with any of the bundles that were already removed should be already out of the system, but certain bundles could be left to the side. What I would want to do in that case, if you were doing that kind of an operation when it went down, run feature info against the MDSal, see what set of bundles it's telling you it's installed or would put to that feature, and then I would just do a list -T0 and grep and look for some of those, as a manual kind of way to go back and check to make sure that all the required files have been removed, or just rerun the uninstall command once again. Same thing for the install command. If you're installing and pull the power during that, a certain number of resources will have been installed by that point, so the persistence nature of the OSHI Core 9 would be that when you restart Karaf, those bundles would be started and reinstantiated. But yeah, there could be a case where not all the entire feature had been fully installed by that point. That's a case there that it's a bit of an edge case, and the way I would want to test against that, we would want to set up a PAX exam case, start installing, and then we'd want to set up some kind of a test that would have to kill the Karaf container midway through install. I'm not really sure even how we would want to write that. We'd probably have to update PAX exam to be able to do that kind of a test. Very interesting use case, though. That would be really fun to look into, see how you can implement it. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, emergency shutdown on a machine that's overheated, or if you say like the RAID array underneath it is on parity and you need to remove some disks and you want to shut down services while you're removing the hard drives. Yeah, that would definitely be a case where well, I would still try to do a safe shutdown in that case. If you're not, just pulling the plug is like, that's still the most extreme situation, and that's still, yeah, yeah. I mean, generally what we always want to have is ups connected to the servers anyway, so that way you can keep running until you can shut it down and just force it to go down. Worst case scenario at that point is just shut down -F to force it and make it go down as fast as it can, and that's basically what you have on the command line right now. Any more questions? We have about 5 minutes left of our time allotted. Well then, if there's no more further questions, I'm going to give you guys back your 5 minutes of your time so you can continue on to our talks. If you want to approach afterwards and talk about any more questions, or if you want to dive into some of the code and see how the feature mechanism is currently working line by line, or dive into Cellar and attempt to set up a small cluster and see what we can do with OpenDaylight with it, or take a look through a little deeper into Decanter, I'm here. I'd love to be able to start showing some of the community here what we can use and reuse from Karaf. So thank you very much for your time. Yes, one more question.
Hand out 2 books.
Yes, I was going to hang out a pair of books. What I was going to do was for the first couple of people who were asking questions to me, which were coming over from this table, and substantial number of questions are coming from this direction.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, guys. Yeah, thank you.